Nobody told Nandi Sele that the man sitting at her kitchen table was dangerous. To be fair, nobody told her much of anything. She was 2. She had opinions about that. It is almost midnight. 4 men are inside the apartment. The kind of men who do not knock, the kind who do not need to. 3 of them are standing, positioned the way men position themselves when they want a room to understand something without saying it. The 4th is at the kitchen table, completely still, turning something small and silver between his fingers with the patience of someone who has never once not been paid. The room is so quiet you can hear the refrigerator hum. Nomsa Sele stands in her own doorway and does not move. She came home from her 3rd job of the day to find this, her apartment, her kitchen, her table occupied. And she is doing the thing she has learned to do when something is real and enormous. She is staying very still and thinking very clearly, and not looking at the bedroom door, because looking at what you most want to protect is an invitation, and she is not going to give them that. The man at the table looks up. His face is calm. That is the most frightening thing about him. Not the blade, not the size of him, not the 3 men standing at angles. The calm, the complete, settled calm of someone who has already decided how this ends. "You owe my employer money, Ms. Sele," he says. She opens her mouth. And then, from the back bedroom, 2 small feet hit the floor. A door swings open. Nandi Sele, aged 2, wearing a shirt that says, "I woke up like this," and absolutely nothing else, comes around the corner at full confidence, stops, and looks at the room full of men. She tilts her head. The most dangerous man in the room looks back at her. She takes 4 steps, directly toward him, past all reason, past all instinct, grabs his trouser leg, looks straight up at him, and throws up on his shoes. Then she raises both arms. She wants to be picked up. By him. Nobody in that room breathes. If you are new here, subscribe before this gets even more chaotic. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? I want to see every city, every country, every time zone this reaches. The suit cost more than Nomsa made in 4 months. She knew this because she knew fabric. Her mother had been a seamstress in Durban. And even standing in her doorway with 4 men in her apartment and her heart somewhere near her throat, some precise and furious part of her brain had clocked it immediately. The cut, the weight of it, the kind of jacket that did not belong in this building, on this street, in any version of her life. That thought lasted approximately 1 second. The second thought was Nandi. She did not look toward the bedroom. She kept her eyes on the man at the table, and the man kept his eyes on her, and the room held a specific kind of silence, the kind with edges. He was not what fear had prepared her for. She had expected aggression or theater or the performance of menace that men like this sometimes needed to give. Instead, he was simply still. The blade turned between his fingers almost lazily. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough that she had to focus to catch it. "You owe my employer money, Miss Sele." She opened her mouth. From the back bedroom, 2 small feet hit the floor. Nomsa's stomach dropped straight through the earth. The door swung open the way Nandi opened every door, with her whole body, no hesitation, maximum commitment. And there she was, 1 sock, shirt sideways, the look of a person who had just woken up and found this entirely acceptable. She came around the corner, stopped, and took in the room with the calm assessment of someone conducting an inspection. 3 standing men, 1 at the table. She looked past all of them, straight to the one at the table. Children always find the important one, some instinct older than language, more honest than fear. She walked toward him. "Nandi!" The word left Nomsa as almost nothing. Barely air. Nandi reached him, grabbed his trouser leg with 1 fist, looked straight up, and was sick all over his shoes. The silence that followed had never existed before. It was a new kind of silence, specific to this moment, this kitchen, this particular collision of the terrifying and the absurd. Nomsa could not speak, could not move. She stood in her own doorway and experienced simultaneously the worst fear of her adult life and a humiliation so complete it had its own separate weight. The specific, airless mortification of having the most dangerous moment you have ever lived through hijacked entirely by your toddler's stomach. Hyunjun looked down at his ruined jacket, his ruined shoes, then at the small person responsible. Nandi looked back up at him, unbothered, already done with that chapter of the evening. She raised both arms. Something crossed his face. Not softness, nothing that legible. More like a man opening a door he did not know was there and finding on the other side a room he had no map for. He picked her up. Not gently, exactly, carefully. The way you handle something you do not understand but have decided for reasons you cannot yet explain even to yourself not to put down. He held her slightly away from his body, both hands under her arms, studying her with the focused attention of someone encountering a problem entirely outside their existing categories. Nandi studied him back. Then she grabbed his collar with one fist, reached up with her other hand and patted his cheek, twice. Firm, deliberate pats, the kind that mean nothing specific and somehow everything. Then she turned and pointed at Nomsa with great authority, as though completing an introduction that had been long overdue. "Mama," she announced. Hyunjun looked at Nomsa. Nomsa looked at Hyunjun. The blade was still in his other hand. He appeared to have forgotten it was there. "The debt," he said to no one in particular, "is being reviewed." He set Nandi down, she immediately reattached to his trouser leg and had to be carefully detached by the nearest man, who looked as though he would rather be literally anywhere else on the planet, and walked to the door without another word. His men followed in the particular silence of people who understood, without being told, that what they had just witnessed was never to be discussed. The door closed. Nomsa stood in the middle of her kitchen. Nandi toddled to Nomsa, sat on her foot, and looked up pleasantly, the look of a person whose evening had gone rather well. "Knifey," she said, to no one in particular. Nomsa had no idea what that meant yet. She sat down on the floor next to her daughter, put her face in her hands, and stayed there for a very long time. Nomsa sat on that floor for 23 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock on the microwave the entire time, the green numbers moving with complete indifference to what had just happened in this kitchen. 12:04, 12:11, 12:27. The refrigerator hummed. Nandi had relocated from Namsa's foot to the rug in front of the television and was now attempting to feed her sock to a plastic giraffe. Life, apparently, was continuing. Namsa got up. She checked the front door lock, still the original, still flimsy, still the kind a determined shoulder could handle in one go. She checked the window in Nandi's room. She changed Nandi into fresh pajamas, which Nandi resisted with the full force of her personality, and settled her back into the crib with the pink rabbit and the argument that always preceded sleep. Then she set her alarm for 4:45 a.m. and lay on top of her bed, fully dressed, and did not sleep at all. By 6 a.m., she was behind a register at the supermarket on Clement Street, scanning groceries for people who had not yet fully woken up. By noon, she was on her knees in an office building on the 4th floor, working a floor buffer along corridors that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. By 8 p.m., she was at her kitchen table with a headset on, managing delivery dispatch for a logistics company whose drivers called in problems she could not solve with resources she did not have. 3 jobs. Not because Nomsa Sele lacked ambition, because ambition, in her experience, did not cover rent. It did not cover Nandi's daycare, or the inhaler she needed in winter, or the debt she had taken because there was no other option, and the man who offered it had seemed, at the time, like a lifeline. She had learned since then what lifelines look like from the other end. On the fridge, held up by a magnetic letter N that Nandi had claimed and would not return, was a flyer. 4 years old, curling at the corners, the ink faded enough to suggest she had never quite managed to take it down. Open mic night, every Thursday. New voices welcome. There was a small graphic of a microphone. There was a date that had long since passed. Namza did not look at it. She never looked at it directly. It was simply there, the way certain things stay, not because you forget to remove them, but because removing them would mean something you are not ready to mean. Across the city, in an office that did not officially exist on any building register, Baek Hyun-jun stood before his employer and delivered his report. The debt, he said, was being reviewed. Chairman Oh did not move. He was a small man with very still eyes, the kind of stillness that was not calm, but rather the surface of something deep and cold and patient. Reviewed, he repeated. Yes. You, a pause, are reviewing it. Hyun-jun said nothing. There was nothing to say that would improve the situation. Chairman Oh studied him for a long moment, the way you study a door that has always opened inward and has for the first time done something else. Then he nodded once, slowly, and looked back at his desk. Don't take long, he said. Hyun-jun left. In the elevator going down, he looked at his reflection in the steel doors. There was still a small handprint on his jacket collar, faint, already drying, the kind of mark that would come out in the wash. He looked at it the entire way down. He did not, for reasons he could not explain, find himself in any particular hurry to have the jacket cleaned. He told himself it was an assessment. This was the word he used, internally, on the drive over. Assessment. A professional evaluation of circumstances relevant to an open account. He was not returning to the apartment of a woman who owed his employer money for any reason other than due diligence. He was thorough. He was known for being thorough. This was thoroughness. He brought tools because he always carried tools. Nomsa was at work. All 3 of her jobs ran on a schedule he had obtained without difficulty, because obtaining information without difficulty was another thing he was known for. Nandi was at daycare until 3. The building super, a tired man named Gerald, who recognized the particular energy of someone it would be unwise to question, let him in without being asked twice, and found somewhere else to be immediately afterward. Hyun-jun stood in the middle of Nomsa's apartment and conducted his assessment. The sink dripped. Not occasionally, steadily, with the rhythm of something that had been dripping for months and had simply been endured, because enduring was cheaper than fixing. The washer was gone. He replaced it in 4 minutes using parts he had, for no particular reason, in his jacket pocket. The front door lock was the original building hardware, a bolt so old and loose that the door could be opened with patient pressure and no key at all. He replaced it with a deadbolt he sourced from the hardware store on the corner, which took 20 minutes and left Gerald a set of 2 keys he accepted without making eye contact. The window in the child's room did not close flush with the frame. In winter, this would be a draft. In the current situation, it was something else, a point of entry, a vulnerability, a thing that should not exist in a room where someone small was sleeping. He reseated the frame, replaced the latch, and checked it 3 times. Then he stood in the doorway of Nandi's room for a moment, the pink rabbit in the crib, the plastic giraffe on the floor, the small shelf of board books arranged with the randomness of a person who could not read but had strong opinions about ownership. He left. On the kitchen table he placed a note. He was not a man who wrote notes generally, but the window seal was a separate issue requiring a specific part he did not have, and leaving it unaddressed felt imprecise. He wrote, "The window seal needs replacing. I will return Thursday." He looked at it, added nothing, left. Nomsa found it at 9:47 p.m. underneath her keys. She read it once, then again. Then she stood at her kitchen table and listened to her now silent sink and looked at her firmly locked door and read it a third time, searching it for warmth the way you search a completely empty room, thoroughly and without result. It was the least tender thing she had ever read. She could not explain why her eyes were doing what they were doing. Nandi, freshly retrieved from the neighbor who minded her after daycare, toddled over, grabbed the note with both hands, and ate the corner with the word Thursday on it. She let her. She knew when it was.
He came back Thursday. He replaced the window seal in 11 minutes, tested the latch 4 times, and was preparing to leave when Nandi emerged from the hallway with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting and was not going to waste the opportunity. She planted herself directly in his path. He stopped. She looked up at him with the gravity of a small person conducting an important evaluation. Then she pointed at him and said carefully, "Hyun..." A pause. "Hyunju..." Another pause, longer, during which her face cycled through several expressions. Then she abandoned the project entirely, shook her head, and announced with complete finality, "Mr. Knifey." He looked at her. She looked back, satisfied, the way someone looks after correctly naming a thing that had needed naming. He did not correct her. There was something in her certainty that made correction feel not just unnecessary, but structurally wrong, like arguing with a tide. She disappeared back down the hallway and returned 45 seconds later carrying a plastic crown, pink. 3 of the fake jewels were missing. She held it up toward him with both hands, the way you offer something precious, and waited. He looked at the crown. He looked at Nandi. Nandi did not waver. He bent down. She placed it on his head with the seriousness of a coronation, adjusting it once, twice, leaning back to assess, then nodding, satisfied. He straightened up. The crown sat slightly askew above a face that expressed nothing whatsoever. From the kitchen doorway, Nomsa watched all of this happen. She had come home 12 minutes ago to find her daughter already in conversation with a man who should have frightened her, and instead appeared to be his employer. She had said nothing because there was nothing immediately to say, and because she was very, very tired, and her feet hurt, and Nandi was clearly fine. She put the kettle on. She made 2 cups of coffee without deciding to. She put one on the table and sat down with the other. Hyunjun sat across from her, the crown still on his head, perfectly upright now despite being slightly too small, as though it had decided to behave, and drank his coffee and said nothing. Nandi played on the floor between them. The silence was not comfortable, exactly, but it was not the silence from that first night either. It had different air in it. Namsa started talking. She did not plan to. Exhaustion, she had learned, dismantled planning, stripped it right down until what was left was just the truth, with nowhere else to go. She talked about Durban, about arriving here with a number she had been given by someone her cousin trusted, and the trust turning out to be misplaced in the specific, expensive way that trust always seemed to go misplaced when you had nothing to lose it with. About the loan that had seemed, at the time, like a door opening, about what it looked like from this side of it. Hyunjun listened. He did not offer solutions, did not say, "you should have," or "why didn't you?" The 2 phrases she had received most consistently from people who meant well and understood nothing. He just listened, with the same stillness he brought to everything, and somehow that stillness, which had frightened her 3 weeks ago, now felt like the most useful thing anyone had offered her in months. She stopped talking, looked at her cup. Then she looked up at him, at this man, in her kitchen, in a pink plastic crown with 3 jewels missing, drinking his coffee like it was the most natural place in the world to be. She smiled. It arrived before she could stop it, small, involuntary, the kind that comes from somewhere you forgot you still had. She looked away immediately, pressed her lips together. Hyunjun looked at the window. He had noticed. She knew he had noticed. He was not going to say anything about it, and neither was she, and somehow that made it worse and better at the same time. Nandi looked up from the floor, assessed both adults, and went back to her giraffe. It started with the red car. Nandi had a collection of small vehicles that lived in a margarine container under the coffee table. Cars, a bus, something that may have once been a truck but had lost enough parts to be open to interpretation. The red car was her favorite. Namsa knew this because Nandi carried it into every room, including the bathroom, and had once cried for 20 minutes when it was accidentally left at the neighbor's. On a Thursday in early November, Nandi climbed onto the sofa next to Hyunjun, which she now did with the ease of someone exercising a well-established right, and noticed his hands. He had rolled his sleeves to his forearms, something he did without thinking, habit, temperature. The scars ran along the left one in pale, raised lines, the kind that come from something specific and do not fade completely no matter how many years pass over them. Nandi studied them with great seriousness. Then she produced the red car and began to drive it, slowly, along the longest one. Hyunjun went completely still, not tense, still. He watched her do it, the way you watch weather, something happening outside your control that you have decided for now not to interrupt. The car moved from his wrist to his elbow in a careful, winding route. Nandi made a very quiet engine sound with her mouth. It started with the red car. Nandi had a collection of small vehicles that lived in a margarine container under the coffee table. Cars, a bus, something that may have once been a truck but had lost enough parts to be open to interpretation. The red car was her favorite. Nandi knew this because Nandi carried it into every room, including the bathroom, and had once cried for 20 minutes when it was accidentally left at the neighbor's. On a Thursday in early November, Nandi climbed onto the sofa next to Hyunjun, which she now did with the ease of someone exercising a well-established right, and noticed his hands. He had rolled his sleeves to his forearms, something he did without thinking, habit, temperature. The scars ran along the left one in pale, raised lines, the kind that come from something specific and do not fade completely no matter how many years pass over them. Nandi studied them with great seriousness. Then she produced the red car and began to drive it, slowly, along the longest one. Hyunjun went completely still, not tense, still. He watched her do it the way you watch weather, something happening outside your control that you have decided, for now, not to interrupt. The car moved from his wrist towards his elbow in a careful, winding route. Nandi made a very quiet engine sound with her mouth. Namsa was in the doorway. She had come to call Nandi for dinner and had stopped without knowing she was stopping. She watched for a moment, this enormous, scarred, completely unreadable man, and her daughter navigating his arm like a road she had always known. "How did you get them?" she asked quietly, the way you ask things you already half know the answer to. He looked up at her. "Work," he said. She looked at her own hands on the doorframe, cracked at the knuckles, dry in the way that no cream fully fixed anymore, the kind of dry that came from commercial cleaning products and cold water and not enough time to care about it. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." He looked at her hands. She looked at his. Nobody said anything else. The red car made another quiet circuit. Sometimes the most honest conversations had no more words than that. The nail polish happened the following Thursday. Nandi arrived at the sofa with 4 bottles, red, yellow, a green that was nearly brown, and a purple that had mostly dried out but still had ambitions. She communicated her intentions clearly, the way she communicated everything, by simply beginning. Hyunjun looked at the bottles, looked at Nandi, looked at Namsa, who was leaning against the kitchen counter with her coffee and an expression of absolute neutrality that she was visibly working to maintain. He placed his hands on the table. Nandi worked with total concentration for 15 minutes. The result bore no relationship to his actual nails. It was more of a regional situation. Color applied to fingers in the general vicinity of the nail and slightly beyond. Each hand a different combination. The purple thumb on the right hand particularly ambitious in its coverage. She leaned back and assessed her work. Pitiful, Namsa said into her coffee cup. Hyunjin looked at his hands, said nothing. Later, on the bus home, a 40-minute ride he took because parking in this neighborhood was difficult, and for no other reason, he looked at his hands under the fluorescent lights. 4 colors, slightly catastrophic. The purple thumb catching the light every time the bus moved. He thought about removing it when he got home. He did not remove it. He looked at it the entire ride, the city moving past the window, and said nothing to no one, which was, for Bak Hyun-jun, as close to peace as he had ever come.
It was the wine. 1 glass, that was all it took, because Nomsa had not eaten properly since Tuesday, and had been awake since 4, and worked 16 hours across 2 locations, and was therefore operating with approximately none of the defenses she normally kept in very good order. Nandi was asleep. Actually asleep, the real kind, the kind that stuck. The apartment was quiet in the way it only got after 9, and Hyun-jun was still at the table because he had arrived late and fixed the bathroom cabinet hinge, and then simply not left, which had become, without either of them formally agreeing to it, a thing that sometimes happened. Nomsa looked at the fridge, at the flyer. She did not mean to say anything about it. And then she did. She told him about the open mic nights the way you tell someone about a country you used to live in, with the particular mix of love and grief that comes from knowing you cannot go back. Thursday nights, a small room above a bar in the Mission that smelled like beer and ambition. She had been building a set for 8 months, material about immigration, about her mother's voice on bad phone connections, about the specific comedy of being the only person in a room who finds your own situation funny because the alternative was worse. She had been getting good. She had known she was getting good because the laughs were coming from the right places, not from pity, not from shock, but from recognition. The last night she performed, she said, the room had laughed so hard at one point that someone spilled their drink and nobody cared. It had felt like light. That was the only word she had for it, like standing in actual light. 3 weeks later, the support system collapsed. The relationship ended. The money ran out. Nandi arrived early and loud and perfect, and Nomsa made a choice, because there was only one choice available, and she made it without flinching because that was what you did. She stopped performing. She told herself it was temporary. Then she stopped telling herself anything about it at all. I decided, she said, looking at her wine glass, that I didn't have the right to it anymore. You know, some things are for people whose lives have room. Hyun-jun was quiet for a long time. Then he said, That sounds like a waste. She looked at him. He did not elaborate. He did not soften it or explain it or walk it back. He just held her gaze with that same flat steadiness and let the words sit there, taking up space, being true. She opened her mouth, closed it. She could not decide if she wanted to cry or argue, so she did a small amount of both, eyes bright, jaw tight, a sound escaping that was not quite either thing. You don't know anything about it, she said. No, he agreed.
A beat. But I know what it looks like, he said, when someone buries something that was supposed to be the point of them. She stared at him. He looked away first, not from discomfort, she thought, but from the particular privacy of someone who has said more than they intended. The room was quiet. Then Nandi's voice came from the bedroom, not crying, just talking, the way she sometimes talked in her sleep, full sentences addressed to no one. Both adults listened instinctively. In the silence that followed, Nandi said clearly, Mr. Niffy. Nomsa looked at Hyunjun. Something shifted in his face, fast, gone almost before it arrived, but she saw it. She was beginning to learn how to see the things that moved quickly across him. She asked carefully, "Where did you grow up?" He picked up his coffee cup, put it down. "Here and there," he said. "Family?" A pause that had a shape to it. From the bedroom, Nandi stirred again. "Where Niffy mommy?" she asked the ceiling, conversationally, the way 2-year-olds ask enormous questions, without weight, without knowing, without any idea what they have just put their small hand directly on top of. Hyunjun said nothing. That was the answer. Nomsa understood, in the way you understand things that are never going to be said out loud, that there was no answer because there had never been anything to answer with, that whatever should have been there at the beginning of him had been replaced so early with something else that he could not now locate where one ended and the other began. She did not push. She refilled her glass, pushed the bottle an inch toward him. He poured a small amount, and they sat in the quiet kitchen while the city moved outside, and Nandi talked softly to herself in the next room, and neither of them said anything else for a while. It was, Nomsa thought, the most honest evening she had spent with another person in 4 years, which was either very comforting or very sad. Probably, she decided, both. The office that did not officially exist was on the 14th floor of a building that officially held an import consultancy. Chairman Oh was behind his desk when Hyunjun arrived, which meant he had been waiting, which meant this was not a routine summons. Hyunjun stood. He did not sit unless invited. He had never been invited. Chairman Oh slid a folder across the desk without looking up. Hyunjun opened it. Inside was a copy of a loan agreement, the original paperwork, the version the borrower signed. Namsa's signature at the bottom, neat and careful, the signature of someone who had read everything and still had no real choice. "There was an error," Chairman Oh said, "by someone who is no longer in a position to correct it." Hyunjun looked at the pages. Embedded in the financial appendix, buried in the kind of language designed to be unread, were routing numbers, account structures, transaction codes, the full skeleton of a laundering operation that had taken 6 years to build, sitting in a document that had been signed and filed and handed to a woman in a small apartment who had no idea what she was holding. "She doesn't know," Hyunjun said. "It doesn't matter what she knows," Chairman Oh said. "It matters what she has." He looked up then. His eyes did the thing they did, that deep, patient measurement, the look of a man who had spent decades reading faces for the first sign of a problem. Hyunjun's face gave him nothing. It never did. That was why he had lasted this long. "Handle it," Chairman Oh said. "Yes," Hyunjun said. He left. He drove to the apartment without deciding to. Or rather, he decided and did not examine the decision because examination had a way of producing conclusions he was not ready to reach. He let himself in with the key Gerald no longer questioned. The apartment was dim, the kitchen light on, the rest of the rooms dark and quiet. Namsa was asleep at the table. 16-hour day, probably. Her head was on her folded arms, her breathing slow, a pen still loosely in her hand from whatever she had been doing before exhaustion made the decision for her. Nandi's crib, visible through the open bedroom door, was covered in drawings. Crayon on paper, paper taped to the bars, a city of marks that meant nothing to anyone except their architect, who was asleep in the middle of them. His phone was in the crib. He retrieved it carefully. The screen was full of notifications and 47 photos, every one of them Nandi's face from approximately 2 inches away. Nostrils, one eye, a blurred mouth, the top of her own head taken by accident. 47. She had been busy. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the drawings for a long time. He looked at Namsa's pen still in her hand. He looked at the folder he was still carrying. He set the folder on the table, sat down, and for several minutes he was simply still, in the way he was always still, except that this stillness was different. It was not the stillness of someone who had decided. It was the stillness of someone deciding. He put his hand on Namsa's shoulder. She woke the way exhausted people wake, slowly, then all at once. Confusion, then recognition, then briefly the old fear that was never entirely gone. He moved his hand back. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was quiet and completely level. "And you need to listen before you say anything." Namsa looked at his face, then at the folder on the table, then at his face again. She sat up straight. She nodded.
He told her everything. The organization, the loan structure, the names behind the names, the clerical error that had put 6 years of criminal architecture into a document she had signed in good faith at a folding table in someone's back office because she needed money and there was nowhere else to get it. He told her about the order. He used the word eliminate because it was the accurate word and she deserved accuracy. Namsa listened to all of it without moving. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Nandi was breathing steadily in the next room. Outside, a car passed. Then nothing. Namsa looked at the table, at the folder, at her own hands flat on the surface in front of her, those cracked, dry, three-job hands that had been working toward survival for so long they had forgotten what else they knew. Then she looked up. "What do we do?" she said. Not, "What are you going to do about this?" We. One small word that contained, without ornamentation or performance, the entire decision she had just made. Hyunjun looked at her. It was not a long look. He was not a man who looked at things long when he could be moving instead. But he looked, and something in the looking settled, some last interior question answering itself quietly, without fanfare. "I need 2 hours," he said. "Pack what matters. Only what matters." She was already standing. He worked from a laptop in the car, connected through layers that would take longer to trace than they had. His access to the organization's financial systems was deep and specific. 14 years of seniority bought certain keys, and he moved through them without hesitation, extracting the full records, the complete structure, every account and routing number and transaction trail that Chairman O had spent years building in the dark. He packaged it cleanly, sent it through a channel that terminated at a federal inbox and began nowhere near Nomsasele. She would not appear in what followed. That was not luck. That was the last useful thing he could do with 14 years of knowing exactly how these things worked. He drove Nomsa and Nandi to an apartment on Terraville that belonged to a man who owed him a debt of a different kind entirely. He carried Nandi inside. She was mostly asleep, heavy and warm, her face against his shoulder. He set her down on the bed. He did not let himself look at her for long. "Stay here," he told Nomsa. "Don't open the door. I'll call when it's done." Nomsa caught his sleeve. She did not say anything. She looked at him the way she had been looking at him for weeks, that direct, clear-eyed look that had never once performed anything, that had always just been exactly what it was. He left before it could cost him his momentum. They found him 40 minutes later. He had expected that. He had not expected 3 of them, or the confined space, or the particular efficiency of men who had been told this was personal. The confrontation was not clean. It was not quick. It happened in a stairwell under fluorescent lights, and it was brutal in the way that real violence is brutal. Graceless, exhausting, the kind that leaves you on the floor afterward not certain for several long moments which direction is up. He survived. He was not entirely sure, for a while, that he would. He called from the floor of the stairwell, his back against the wall, waiting for the world to stop tilting. The phone rang once. She answered before the second. She said nothing. Just breath, present, waiting. "It's done," he said. A silence. Then, "Are you hurt?" He looked at the state of things.
Some, he said. How much is some? I'll live. Another silence. Longer. He could hear Nandi in the background, babbling at something, completely unbothered by the hour or the world. Okay, Nomsa said. Her voice was steady and quiet, and he understood in that moment that steady and quiet was not the absence of feeling. It was what feeling looked like in a person who had learned to hold enormous things without dropping them. Okay, he said back. He stayed on the floor a little longer. It was enough, for now, just to have someone on the other end of the line. The organization took 3 weeks to dismantle formally, and considerably longer to dismantle in all the ways that mattered. The debt was voided in the 4th week, a single line in a legal document, almost disappointingly small for something that had cost so much, and Namsa received a letter she read 4 times and then put in a drawer because she did not yet trust good news to stay. Hyunjin recovered slowly and with poor grace. He was not a patient patient. He did not rest when told to rest, did not eat when told to eat, and had twice attempted to fix things in the Tarval apartment while technically still unable to lift his left arm above the shoulder, which Namsa had addressed both times with a directness that left no room for negotiation. She brought food every other day. She was very clear that this was caloric strategy, not sentiment, that a person who could not stand up properly was a logistical problem, and she was solving it practically, and he should not read anything into the fact that she had made the soup the specific way her mother made it, or that there was always enough for 2. He did not read anything into it out loud. Nandi, for her part, had discovered his bandages. The left forearm, newly wrapped, was, in her assessment, an improved road, broader, better surface. She arrived one Tuesday with 3 washable markers and went to work with the focused professionalism of someone expanding infrastructure, adding junctions, a roundabout near his wrist, what appeared to be a small building near the elbow. He sat completely still through all of it, as he always did, his face expressing nothing, his eyes tracking her progress with an attention he did not bother to conceal anymore. In January, he started the security work. Legal, quiet, ordinary, the kind of shift work that ended at a specific time and required nothing of him that he could not give and leave behind. His contact, a man who owed him a favor so old it had begun to collect interest, asked no questions and required no explanations. He was not sure how to be ordinary. He was trying. Some days, trying looked like showing up. That was enough for now. Nomsa did the open mic on a Friday in February. She was terrified in the way that only matters when something is real. She stood in the wings of a small room above a bar that smelled like beer and ambition, the same smell, a different room 4 years later, and her hands were shaking and her mouth was dry, and she thought very seriously about leaving. She went out anyway. The crowd did not stop laughing for 45 minutes. She did not hold back. She gave them everything: 3 jobs, the loan, the stairwell of bad decisions, the immigration paperwork that had required a document she did not have to obtain the document she needed to get the document she had originally come for. She gave them Nandi, feral, luminous, tyrannical Nandi, who had strong opinions on shoes and no opinions about bedtime, and had recently attempted to feed scrambled eggs to a pigeon through the window with a focus that frankly deserved a better outcome. She saved the closing bit for last. About survival, she said. About the specific, absurd, only-in-this-life experience of raising a feral toddler with the help of the most emotionally unavailable babysitter in organized crime history. About a man who fixed your sink without asking and wore a plastic crown without flinching and once sat on a bus for 40 minutes with 4 colors on his nails and, she paused, did not take it off. The room came down. Front row. Baek Yeonjun, Nandi on his lap, already in pajamas because it was late and this had been non-negotiable, and she had fallen asleep twice on the way here and was now, inexplicably, completely awake. 4 colors on his nails, fresh because Nandi had insisted on a new coat before they left. the plastic crown slightly crooked, his face stern and still, and completely, entirely, unmistakably laughing somewhere just behind his eyes, where he kept the things that were most true. Nandi watched the stage, watched her mother move through the light. Then she stood up on his lap, cupped her hands around her mouth, and shouted with her entire body, "That's my mummy!" The room lost itself completely. Hyunjun reached up, straightened her crown. He did not laugh. He did not need to. There is a version of this story where Baekhyunjun walks away, where he sits at that kitchen table, turns the blade between his fingers, delivers the message, and leaves the way he always leaves, cleanly, completely, without remainder, where the debt gets collected or the debt gets worse, and Nomsa Sele becomes another name in a file that closes quietly and stays closed, where Nandi grows up never knowing that a man with scarred hands once held her in a ruined jacket at midnight and felt, for reasons he could not name and did not examine, that he was not only a weapon. That version exists. It is not a dramatic version. It does not announce itself. It just happens, the way most losses happen, without music, without warning, in an ordinary room on an ordinary night. There is a version where Momsa never goes back to the stage, where the flyer on the fridge keeps curling at the edges until it falls, and she throws it away, and that is that. Where the funniest person in every room she enters keeps it locked inside because the world has spent considerable energy suggesting she does not have the right to take up that kind of space, and exhaustion, eventually, makes a person inclined to agree. Where 3 jobs becomes the whole of the story, because survival, when it is all you have room for, has a way of becoming all you can imagine. That version exists too. Those versions happen to people, in real kitchens, in real cities, every day, quietly, without a front row or a punchline or anyone straightening their crown. But this is not that story. This is the story of a 2-year-old who had not yet learned what fear was supposed to look like, who walked into a room full of dangerous men and saw, with the complete clarity that belongs only to people who have not yet been taught to doubt themselves, exactly one thing worth walking toward, who could not pronounce his name and so gave him a better one, who put a crown on the most feared man she had ever met and waited, with total patience, for him to understand that it fit. Nandi was right about him. She was too. She was right. If this story found something in you, if you have ever been Nonsa, running on stubbornness and a 16-hour shift and the specific dignity of a person who refuses to perform fear even when they feel it, this was for you. If you have ever been Hyunjun, not knowing how to receive the thing you needed most, moving through the world useful and unreachable, and quietly hoping someone would hand you a crown anyway, this was for you. And if you have ever been Nandi, unbothered, certain, reaching up, keep doing that. The world needs more of it than it knows. If this story reached you, share it. Leave it somewhere someone will find it on a day they need it. Stories like this do not find their people by accident. They travel because someone decided another person needed to hear them. If you are not subscribed yet, become part of this room. New stories live here, told with care, told without shortcuts, told for people who feel things deeply and want somewhere to bring that. Subscribe. Drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you are watching from, because this story has already traveled further than I expected, and I want to know every place it lands. Silent Speaks Stories, where every story leaves a mark.